Have you noticed something?
Following breaking news out of the Middle East, Israeli defense forces say
the Israeli military says Hamas.
As Israel says it targeted tunnels and weapons manufacturing sites.
Israel says
we spoke with the international spokesperson from the IDF, Richard Hecht.
Israeli authorities say
the Israelis say
Israel says
Israel's defense forces saying
Israel saying that's according to the Israeli military.
Israel says every single time. But over in Israel, prominent journalists stopped believing the military years ago. Back in 2015, Gideon Levy would write a scathing article in the Israeli Haaretz saying, quote, "The policy of denial and disconnection from reality is rising to a dangerous level, and the illness is getting worse. Israel further entrenches itself in its imaginary reality. It's all just a matter of Hasbara, the Israeli euphemism for propaganda." Now, the term Hasbara has its nuances. Hasbara is one of those wacky Israeli words that defy translation, but as senior Haaretz correspondent Anshel Pfeffer maintains, Hasbara is simply the act or profession of explaining. Even going so far as to say, Hasbara is now one of the basic tenets of 21st century Zionism. Indeed, many Israeli media outlets and think tanks are comfortable with this official-sounding interpretation. And in fact, Hasbara is a fully codified institution within the Israeli government. After the 2006 Lebanon War, the so-called Hasbara apparatus underwent a massive overhaul, which included the creation of a government office dedicated solely to Hasbara, the National Hasbara Headquarters within the Office of the Prime Minister. Its many arms extend to the Foreign Ministry, the Ministry of Diplomacy and Diaspora Affairs, the Ministry of Tourism, the Jewish Agency for Israel, and notably the IDF Spokespersons Division, the propaganda arm of the Israeli military, tasked with operating the IDF's official website and blog, YouTube channel, Twitter, and other social media accounts. Hasbara is identified as not only a state diplomacy infrastructure, but also a cultural phenomenon. Nicholas Lehman of the Columbia Journalism School once described the propensity of so-called people of the book for disputations over text. Indeed, Hasbara appears to be distinctly steeped in religious fundamentalism. Just take the current head of the Israeli Hasbara apparatus, Public Diplomacy Minister Distal Atbarian, whose plans for the future include denying that an Israeli occupation exists and that the Bible is the Jewish people's deed to the land. Other responsibilities as Hasbara minister will doubtless include overseeing Hasbara operations, the purpose of which being to facilitate the synchronization of Israel's narratives, especially during wartime. For this reason, official military communiques have earned the ire of even seasoned Israeli journalists. The state authorities have acquired for themselves a shady reputation when it comes to their credibility. And it's not only journalists, by the way, but also the IDF's very own Major General Yitzhak Brick, who complained that the military suffered from a, quote, culture of lying. In a stunning expose, Brick described within the IDF a culture of lies, whitewashing, squaring circles, concealing information, and coordinating testimonies of those involved before military police investigations begin. After Hamas was elected to power in Gaza in 2007, the US government sought to stage a coup with the full backing of Israel. They failed. After which, Egypt brokered a ceasefire, which Israel violated in November of 2008 by staging a cross-border raid, which killed 6 Hamas officials. Despite breaking the ceasefire, Israel formally justified the attack by saying it was in self-defense against rocket attacks. In the air campaign that ensued, part of the IDF's so-called Operation Cast Lead, 3,000 sorties dropped over 1,000 tons of explosives. And, despite Israeli denials, among the weapons were cluster munitions and incendiary white phosphorus bombs. Mark Garlasco, former chief of high-value targeting at the Pentagon, who later worked with Human Rights Watch, would describe his frustration when investigating Israeli forces. They said in Lebanon they did not use cluster bombs. We found 4 million. They evade answering that they use phosphorus, and we stand there every day watching. How can anyone trust the Israeli military? And though official Israeli statements were replete with falsehoods, a culmination of the Hasbara apparatus, the State of Israel employed other covert means to push their narrative. In Operation Cast Lead, we turned to Jewish communities abroad, and with their help, we recruited several thousand volunteers, said Ilan Stolman, who is Deputy Director of the Information Department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a key fixture of the Hasbara infrastructure. In an interview with the Kalkalist paper, Stolman answered questions about a new professional team of comment writers who will flood websites around the world with pro-Israeli messages, and who will participate in discussions about Israel on blogs around the world, and on websites such as Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Twitter, in particular, would receive, quote, round-the-clock activity. In a pattern that would be repeated in the future, the ministry would recruit educated young people who speak foreign languages and use social media. Our people won't say, "Hello, I'm from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs," nor will they necessarily identify themselves as Israelis. They will speak as citizens and write responses that will appear personal but will be based on a pre-prepared list of messages compiled by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In 2013, the Prime Minister's office would deploy so-called covert units of their own to Israeli universities, taking to Facebook and Twitter and also not disclosing that they were working for the government. These units would be set up in a, quote, semi-military fashion, with a student senior coordinator whose tuition would be covered in exchange for their participation. The other students working under them would also receive partial scholarships. The next year, Israel would launch yet another war on Gaza, this time called Operation Protective Edge. After 3 Israeli teenagers were captured and executed by Palestinian militants in 2014, the Israeli military launched a fake rescue mission despite knowing that the boys were already dead, an excuse to make mass arrests. The massive air war that ensued destroyed 18,000 homes in Gaza and killed thousands of people, in one of the most devastating consequences of Israeli lies via Hasbara in recent memory. To use one example which is emblematic of the whole 2014 war, the only rehabilitation center in Gaza, Al-Wafa Hospital, was completely destroyed in the bombing. To justify the attack, Israel tweeted a fake photo alleging to show a rocket being fired from the hospital. But according to Amnesty International, the image tweeted by the Israeli military does not match satellite images of the Al-Wafa Hospital and appears to depict a different location. Such is the nature of the Israeli Hasbara effort, the principal objective being a positive spin on Israeli actions, and as the documentary record shows, the truth is irrelevant. The narrative takes precedent, leading Gideon Levy of Haaretz to go as far as to call Israeli Hasbara a brainwashing campaign, which has enjoyed dazzling success in Israel. And disseminating Hasbara to an international audience is critical to shaping that narrative. During the bombing of Gaza in 2021, Israeli officials briefed thousands of journalists. In just one day, the IDF foreign media spokesman briefed 180 journalists. With the advent of TikTok as well, the State of Israel saw another opportunity, and their official TikTok account gained tens of thousands of followers over the course of the conflict. In fact, according to a recent investigation from Haaretz, the State of Israel pulled out all of the stops, even waging a psychological warfare campaign against its own citizens, illegal under Israeli law. Undertaken by the IDF spokesperson's unit, the operation sought not to downplay Israeli war crimes or spin them, but to play them up. Using fake social media accounts in order to conceal their military source, IDF officers uploaded images and video of Israeli airstrikes and tried to make the hashtag #GazaRegrets go viral. The disproportionate destruction of Gaza has its negative consequences on Israeli Hasbara efforts, as described by former Hasbara chief Yarden Vadikai. The damage in Gaza is way larger and more dramatic than in Israel. In the world of public opinion, Israel is the stronger side. Palestinians are the weaker side. This is the limitation of Hasbara. You have to say it frankly. Israel is still hard at work deploying armies of keyboard warriors across the internet, and the architects of the operation are quite open about their efforts. Just in 2022, Israel's deputy foreign minister held a webinar for Hasbara activists, saying it is focusing on getting information out on social media to apply pressure on conventional media. The so-called online briefing was attended by about 100 participants, including activists and social media influencers. The deputy foreign minister, who at the time was Mr. Idan Roll, spoke very candidly to them about their important role in shaping public perceptions of Israeli military operations, saying that one of the biggest challenges is to fulfill as many operational goals as possible and as quickly as possible before international political pressure requires the country to halt its campaign. This determines how much breathing space the world gives us to continue hitting our targets, he said. This is where Hasbara comes in. Hasbara gives us time and gives us legitimacy to act and protect ourselves. He called social media specifically an instrument to apply pressure on conventional media. That's the name of the game these days.
Also following breaking news out of the Middle East.
Israel says
Israeli authorities say